Hi, everybody. It's Christina Inge here, VP of Programming for AMA Boston. And we're very excited to have our February speaker, Michael Phelan, here. He is a veteran marketer with a great experience in B2B. And he's going to be speaking on February, at our February event to talk about why B2B sales pipelines are struggling right now and what we can all do about it. Michael, it is great to have you here.
Thanks for having me on, Christina.
I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about your experience, what you've been doing, and what your take is on B2B marketing here now as we head into 2026. Because I think we're all, those of us who are B2B marketers, kind of thinking, how do we build our pipeline in 2026? And you have some unique perspectives on that. Tell me a little bit more about your career in marketing and what you're working on right now.
Yeah, I started actually in the B2B space at companies like Reebok, and then I migrated into the I started B2C and I migrated into B2B at Staples and Iron Mountain, and I worked a lot with high-tech startups and SaaS companies. And about 15 years ago, I formed Go-to-Market Pros because I thought that the go-to-market motion was kind of fragmented, still is a bit. And over the last 10 years or so, I've been helping companies figure out how to grow revenue, ramp revenue. And I've been very specifically focused on what drives prospect engagement and interaction, and also customer engagement and interaction. So I've been doing a lot of research on terms of how are companies getting prospects and customers to interact? How are they getting more discovery meetings? As discovery meetings in general is down between 30 and 40% in 2025. There are some really significant challenges right now on getting prospects and customers to interact and engage. That could be a meeting, that could be an email, that could be a chat, but getting them to ask questions, getting them to submit information, getting them to really engage in a meaningful way, that's really where success is going to be driven by in 2026.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think discovery meetings are so down as opposed to previous years?
There are several reasons for that. One is there's a big change in the way buyers are buying products and services. One is they're going a lot more direct versus through reps.
Mhm.
They're not using distribution channels as much as they did in the past. And one of the things that's very interesting is, and this is new research that just came out yesterday from Forrester. They looked at the three parts of the pipeline, be it early stage, mid stage, or late stage, and they looked at what sources of information folks were using. And the number one is Gen AI search in each one of those. And the talking to a sales rep is falling by the wayside. So I think there's changes on the buyer side, but also the sellers themselves haven't really been able to add much value. They're looking for demos, they're looking for pipeline, they're looking for leads, but they really don't understand how to add authentic value. So that's what I've been looking at is what is that value? And I've found about 30 different ways that companies can add value. I've pressure tested some of them and brought them to market, but there are really great ways of engaging buyers. It's not that buyers don't want to talk to sellers, buyers want value from sellers. So you can engage buyers in early, mid stage, and late stage. If you wait till late stage to engage them, a lot of times the people that win the deals are the big, well-established companies. So there are marketers out there that say, well, we just wait till the buyer's ready and it's all going to be permission based. And I'm like, no, because if you do that, McKinsey and IBM and Salesforce are going to get every sale going. And in fact, what's happening as buyers take more control of the purchase process, they're actually going with the bigger companies. They're going with the more established brands, and they may not be the best solution for the company. There's a lot of great companies out there and great solutions, but you have to figure out a way to add value in the early mid stage, or else you're just not going to get the sale.
Those are some really interesting observations. You talk a lot about the importance of adding value during the sale. What does that look like? Obviously, coming to our event in February is how to get the full inside scoop. But in the meantime, what does it look like to add value as a small company earlier in the funnel, earlier in the sales cycle?
Yeah, one of the things that, and I do about 500 B2B buyer interviews every year. So I'm kind of all the time on the phone with these buyers, asking them, who do you engage with? Why do you engage with them? And I'll give an example of that. I was talking to the head of Target that buys all of their marketing technology. And I said to him, how many companies reach out to you on an average day? He said maybe 80 to 100. I said, well, how many do you meet with on an average month? He said, maybe one or two. And I said, well, how do you filter that down? He says, it's always the same thing. They reach out to me on a critical aspect of my business operation, and they provide insights on what I'm doing versus my competitor. So in this particular case, we were talking about advanced marketing personalization. Target
Mhm.
really ranks that as very important. So does their board. Every time this guy gets in front of the board, he gets asked the same question. Why is Target ranked number 40 in advanced marketing personalization? Why is Sephora number one? And he needs to have an answer to that. So any vendor that approaches him, I've studied your personalization. I've compared it to Sephora. I've looked at what you're doing. I've looked at their process. I've looked at your process. There's some critical things that they're doing that you're not doing. I'd love to have that conversation with you. They'll get the meeting every single time. So bridging performance gaps and understanding you're underperforming versus your competitor is the most powerful way anybody can engage with a company. Very few companies do that. Most of the sales training companies don't even mention that. Many of the so-called marketing gurus out there have no idea how to do that, but there is an effective methodology to do that and to engage. So that's one of the things in this very competitive market. It's not about buying a slightly better product. It's not about buying a slightly cheaper product. It's about understanding what your process is versus competitors versus best in class, where you're underperforming and how to bridge those gaps. So programs that are designed to do that and that are given to the sales force and packaged and trained upon are very, very successful versus all the other things right now that are actually not landing at all with prospects.
That's really good to know. Let's think about though the top of the funnel as well, because for a lot of folks, they're saying that even just the leads are not coming in, they're not getting to the discovery call because they're just not generating leads at the same level that they once were. What do you think that is? Is that happening across the board? And what do you think is driving that?
Yeah, there's two issues. There's the amount of leads, right? And there's the conversion of leads to meetings. And in fact, ironically, a lot of companies don't really track discovery meetings. If you ask a CRO or a CMO, how many discovery meetings do you have this year versus last year? They'll invariably not know the answer to that. So we have an issue with metrics and we have an issue on tracking the right metrics in marketing. But over the last 5 years, MQL, SQL conversion of meetings has gone down by about 50%. So it's really hard. Marketers are pedaling faster, trying to generate more leads, and they're getting less conversion to meetings. And one of the reasons why they're not converting to meetings is there's really no clear strategy to convert the leads to meetings. There's not enough reason for the customer to take that action. So I'll give you an example. Your classic marketing download lead. And they give it to sales. This person downloaded this asset. Well, the reality is they haven't read the asset. The reality is they probably don't even know the company that published the asset. They might have saved it and maybe and they can't even remember that, right? So the rep follows up, going, "What do you think of our asset?" Well, I didn't read it. What do you think of it? Well, I didn't read it either. So there's a lot of like real stupid stuff that goes on. Versus if you had an asset that was designed for multi-stage conversion, for example, it gives them 20% of what they need. And if they want to have a more closer view to what they need, then they take a next step. So let's say I'm doing a research project and it's best practices in advanced marketing personalization. So I publish a study, but if you want to know your score and have the rep talk to you about why you're scored, then you take that next action. So marketers have to design better, more meaningful, research-based, insight-based, informing the customer about something they know, not what they don't know versus what they know. Many marketers reach out and tell people what they know, but really what the buyer wants to know is tell me something I don't know. And invariably, what they don't know is why they're underperforming or why their competitors doing a better job. So we need to design multi-stage, continual value added, and we need to kind of walk away from the stupidity. I call it fool's gold for marketers. The marketing download lead that never gets read, and the rep has nothing of value to contribute when they talk to the prospect. Now, if I was to redo that, I would train the reps to say, I've had 3 conversations with these 3 companies. You know those 3 companies? Oh yeah, they're great companies. And I talked to them about this particular topic and subject. This is what they're doing to solve for it. Would you like to hear more about that? So the customer will be very interested in that, even if they never read. So we need just people who understand buyers much better, understand what they're looking for, know how to create campaigns that deliver value, and help the reps with programs that add successive value on each engagement, not ask them if they read it and what did they think. So that's the difference between what needs to happen now and happened in the past.
I love that. I love that. And I think that's a constant frustration is you have an asset out there and you try to have it do all of the legwork. You have try to have it do all of your selling for you. And in some cases, the follow-ups don't even necessarily dovetail with what the asset is all about. Your asset might be about cost, and then you call and try to book a meeting based on features. And there's that disconnect there. And
Right.
then you don't get the sale, you don't even get the conversation because it's not the conversation that the prospect was hoping to have.
Right.
So that's a really, really important thing to bear in mind. Um, what are some of the things you've talked about, a lot of the things that work? What are some of the things that are counterintuitive that you think are nonetheless truly working right now for brands and for marketers?
Yeah, a lot of the traditional sales training will say, build a relationship with the prospect. And I think that's a fallacy. I don't think professional buyers want to build relationships with BDRs. I think as they want to build relationships with companies they do business with, but they don't want to build relationships with BDRs. So we got to kind of throw that out. So the question is how does a BDR add value? And there are a lot of ways a BDR can add value. For example, there are a lot of great events that happen in any city, in any geography that prospects might be interested in attending. And for a BDR to say, hey, there's a session in your industry, cocktail party, lunch, dinner happening, I think it'd be highly relevant to you. Seems like a lot of folks with your title are attending. I'm going to be there. I'd love to get you a ticket, and we'll have a drink afterwards or whatever. Things like that. So you're pointing out things that can help them professionally. Another one, which is very powerful, is you're helping them promote their brand. So some companies do interviews of their customers and interviews of their prospects, professional interviews, like we're doing a podcast right now. And if you promote the customer, if you provide them a professional asset that they can promote, they're actually promoting your brand as well because you're interviewing them and things like that too. So there's a lot of ways that you can help prospects. And keep in mind, on all of the things I've talked about, I have not pitched my service yet. I've not told the prospect what I'm doing. I'm just helping the prospect. So this concept of give to get. So I want to give a lot to the prospect so I can get an opportunity to tell them what I do, but I really want to get invited into the pitch. I want to say, hey, you've really pointed out some gaps, some issues with my process versus best in class. You've really pointed out some metrics that I have that are off. How can you help me? What does your company do? How can you help me bridge that gap? So you want to kind of add enough value so that you get invited in to sell versus what happens right now is they sell before they've added value, before they've established credibility. So build trust, not relationships, but build a value exchange. That's what's happened to change. So they don't want to be my best friend. They don't want to go to my wedding. They don't want to go on vacation with me. They will only engage with me. And one of the things I've learned, which is amazing, is they're now putting up a huge wall because there's so many BDRs, and with AI and advanced marketing automation, the amount of messages that these guys get from sales and from marketing is exploded. So there's a huge clutter issue. So what I find is if sales are reaching out, they're disengaging because they don't figure there's enough value. So one of the things that I've worked with companies on is have somebody with more credibility reach out to the prospect first and bring sales in on the back end. So if you're doing a professional research project and you're bringing them in as the sponsor of the study, that's more palatable. They'll appreciate the research, they'll learn from that, and then that rep can add some value on the call relative to their use case. The other thing I've found with companies is they really want you to really specifically understand their use case before you pitch them. I'm doing a project right now in fintech, and many of the CFOs have told me that when they do have four vendors come in and pitch, that most of the vendors lose the pitch in the first 5 minutes, which is amazing. And reps don't even know this, that they've alienated or disconnected with the buyer immediately because they haven't figured out what that specific use case, the buying use case is. They haven't done the research. They haven't come in armed and said, here's what you need to solve for. Here's your process. Here's what's wrong with it. Here's the delta. And they're just doing this thing about, let me show you a picture of our building, and here's our investors, and look at all the awards we've won and all that stuff. And the prospect couldn't care less about that at that point. Maybe later they'll do some validation towards the end, but you've got to get to what they need to get to very fast. Don't show them anything that's not completely relevant. So reps have got to do a better job as well, and marketers have got to do a better job of get me to my use case, get me to a what I would call a highly contextual example of what I'm doing versus best in class. And they take too long to get to that. And the CFOs in this case have already checked out in the first 5 or 10 minutes. In fact, several of them said they were going to send the vendors home after 10 minutes, but they felt so bad doing that. They just kind of turned off the sound and did their work on their Zoom meeting, and then said, thanks for coming.
Wow.
We need to really, and the other thing with marketers in general is they don't do a lot of customer research. You ask a marketer, when's the last time you talked to a customer? And the answer could be maybe never. And they'll say things like, well, we're not invited to the meetings. Well, marketers need to take control of, I need a certain level of prospect engagement every week, every month, and not a selling prospect engagement, but an understanding prospect engagement. So marketers need to own the customer and prospect relationship. They need to have constant interaction, and they need to be testing their ideas and getting feedback all the time. And a lot of times they're sitting behind dashboards looking at metrics, but not having meaningful direct interaction. So I say, well, success is driven by how often you talk to your customers and how
Okay.
often you talk to your prospects. And if the answer is zero, the chances of being successful are very low. So
This
I
is
help
very
companies put together programs that deliver consistent interaction with prospects and customers. The other thing I find in general is there's a huge opportunity for land and expand, but a lot of times the people that own land and expand with their current customers don't know how to really prospect. They're good program managers. They're good at implementing programs, but they don't know how to take that one use case and drive it across the organization. So we have a huge opportunity with land and expand. We think we're doing a better job than we are, and we're not. We have to really figure out is how do I really, now that I'm in there, how do I become the center of expertise on that particular process across the company? How do I gravitate everybody in the organization to best practices? And how do I'm the first one to get the call when someone says, hey, we got this process we need to improve. I know you've been doing great stuff and you're hosting this panel and all this thought leadership and you're helping us get better. I'd love you to look at my specific use case. And a lot of times the land and expand guys don't know how to do that effectively. So there's an even bigger opportunity for land and expand with some advanced engagement programs.
Absolutely. Well, that sounds like a way to get through the wall that a lot of organizations are seeing right now in terms of turning prospects into customers and, frankly, even turning website visitors into prospects, becoming that thought leader, becoming that organizational guide, if you will, helping your prospects figure out how to differentiate themselves or how to improve their funnel. In other words, like you said, become the expert and add value, and then you build the trust over time, and that can help you get that sale.
And I would say even become the analyst. If you think about who's the most credible person for B2B tech companies, and a lot of times it's the analyst.
Yeah.
So companies have hired analysts, companies have created analysts, companies have created analyst programs, and it can be done. And especially in small niche markets, you can actually become the lead analyst for your industry. So I do share examples of companies that have done that from a media perspective, who have done it from a prospecting perspective, who have hired analysts. So think about where the credibility is, and think about how do you become more like the source of credibility and less like a salesperson, at least in the early stages. So once they get to know you and your company, you can add a lot of value. You can bring your personality in, and you can bring more trust and relationship in. But in the early stages, be more like an analyst is a really great way for companies to think. And there are 4 or 5 programs I talk about of companies that have done a great, great job on that.
That's an awesome thing. Well, what's a good example of a company that's done exactly what you're saying, that's become the analyst? I'd love to hear some examples of that.
Yeah, so there's a company called Salesroo, and they're an email marketing company. A lot of clutter in that space, and what they did is they went ahead and did a study on all the retailers, and they went ahead and ranked them on how well they were doing advanced marketing personalization from 1 to 100. And the ranking was done based on interviewing their customers, like their retail customers,
Mhm.
looking at their loyalty programs, looking at their web, and so forth. It was a pretty comprehensive program. When they came out with the ranking, they got all calls. They got called in by every one of the top 100 retailers. What is this? What? Why aren't we doing better? We never knew we were doing so bad. Show
Wow.
and compare us. And they continued to do that study. They got invited to speak at conferences. No one else had done something as specific as this. So while there were other analysts doing general retail studies, they really nailed the specificity of it. And what's interesting is they were selling to the CMO of, say, Target or Best Buy. And what they found was they got called in by the C-suite in some cases. And they got called in if somebody fired their CMO, going, "Hey, our ranking is lousy. What should we do? Who should we hire?" They got called in by the investor relations people who now started to track this as a metric. So here's a small company that literally started to dominate their industry, and they took off and left everybody in the dust. People think, oh, you can't be an analyst. Yes, you can. You can be better than an analyst. In fact, many analysts don't do a lot of current research, and many analysts don't do a vendor ranking. And a lot of analysts spend more time selling to the buyers of their service than they do sell into the buyers of their client service, if you know what I mean. So they're very kind of, they're all talking to each other, all the vendors and the analysts are talking to the vendors and so forth. But how many of them are really talking to the buyers? And that's really what you want an analyst to do. So when you peel the onion back, you can actually not only become an analyst, but you become better than an analyst, and then you can dominate your industry. So there's several ways you can do it. That's just one, and I thought that was brilliant, and it was amazing.
Wow. Well, that is a great case study and something we can all emulate. Michael, it's been wonderful talking to you, and we're very excited to have you be speaking to AMA Boston February 12th at Matter Communications offices in Boston, 5 to 7 p.m. It's going to be a great opportunity for B2B marketers, whether you're in sales enablement, whether you're working at the top of the funnel, regardless of where you are in marketing. If you are like the majority of B2B marketers really struggling to get those conversions, this is going to be the event to attend this winter here in Boston. Michael, any final thoughts with this great conversation we've had?
Yeah, and I encourage, salespeople to come, account managers to come, as you say, sales enablement, marketing, GTM folks. And you'll be able to walk away. We'll workshop it. You'll be able to walk away. I'll present 30 different concepts, programs, and you'll be able to pick a couple and then we'll workshop them. So you'll be able to walk away with some really actionable programs to drive both your sales and marketing. And we really look forward to it. It should be a great session. And thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Well, no, we're very excited to have you join us. So, again, February 12th in Boston, Mass. Michael, it has been a delight talking to you. Thank you again so much for your insights today.
Thank you, Christina.